The ballroom was all chandeliers and champagne until the cake hit her face. Not a spill, not an accident. A full handful, shoved and smeared across her skin like a verdict. Frosting clung to her cheeks. Crumbs slid down her collar. The laughter that followed was sharp, cruel, echoing off marble walls meant for elegance, not humiliation. Front and center stood a young blonde heiress, satin dress gleaming, her manicured hand still dusted with sugar. She didn't whisper. She wanted the whole room to hear. Look at her, covered in cake, acting like she belongs. The crowd responded the way privilege often does, first with silence, then with chuckles, then with the chorus of mockery. 3 men in tuxedos doubled over, champagne sloshing in their crystal flutes. Another woman clapped as if it were entertainment instead of cruelty. But the woman at the center of it all, dark skin streaked with cream, black dress now stained, did not flinch. She did not reach to strike back. She did not beg. She lifted her phone, steady hand against the chaos, and spoke only 4 words. Cancel the $40 billion deal. The laughter stuttered. A few gasps cut through. But the heiress smirked wider, misreading the moment, mistaking composure for weakness. This wasn't the first time she'd been shoved to the margins of a room built on money and power. At 16, in a Charlotte hotel lobby, she'd been told, "This space isn't for you." At 25, outside a boardroom in Chicago, she'd been mistaken for the assistant instead of the dealmaker. And now, years later, with entire empires under her command, the same message came again, but this time with frosting. Yet still she stood, silent, anchored, unshaken, because humiliation was a language she had learned to translate into empire. A waiter, young, nervous, froze nearby, phone half raised. He didn't know whether to record or to help. His eyes flicked from the heiress's sneer to the woman's calm. The crowd had already chosen sides. He hadn't yet. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to her. Back to the woman with icing dripping from her jawline and authority humming beneath her breath. The heiress tilted her head, feigning pity, her voice cutting the air like broken glass. Security, escort her out. We don't need gatecrashers here. A ripple of whispers stirred. Who was she, this woman in the ruined black dress? Why hadn't she screamed? Why was her voice so steady when she gave that impossible order, cancel the deal? No one knew. Not yet. But they were about to learn that power doesn't always arrive in sequins or in champagne toasts. Sometimes it walks in quietly, lets you throw a cake in its face, and waits for the silence that follows. And in that silence, it speaks. The ballroom lights burned gold across polished marble, but she carried no sparkle with her. No diamond necklace, no sequined gown, just a black dress, simple, quiet, cut to move rather than to boast. To anyone else in that crowd, she looked like a guest who'd wandered in too far. But she was not a wanderer. She was the reason this evening even existed. Her name was Jordan Ellis, 42 years old, founder of Ellis Global Industries, the woman who had turned a small logistics company into a multi-sector empire that grossed $12 billion last year alone. She'd walked into this party unannounced, no entourage, no flashing cameras, because she wanted to see something real, how they treated someone they didn't think mattered. It wasn't the first time she'd done this. Call it a ritual, call it armor. Each deal she signed carried echoes of the first time she was told, "You don't belong here." 16 years old, waiting in a Charlotte hotel lobby, escorted out as if she were loitering. 25, mistaken for an intern at a Chicago board meeting, despite being the one who built the pitch. She learned early. Rooms like this don't hand respect. They test if you'll demand it. Tonight's test was the ugliest yet. A $4 billion merger had been weeks in the making. The heiress's family wanted access to Ellis Global's infrastructure. Jordan had the final say. They didn't know that when she arrived. She wanted to watch first see their eyes before they saw her name. She blended into the crowd, sipping water instead of champagne. She listened to the brittle laughter of men in tuxedos who talked about markets as if they owned the world. She stood near the cake table, unnoticed, until the heiress decided she was out of place. That was all it took. Sugar, laughter, the sting of frosting turned weapon. Now, with the sting still fresh on her skin, she wasn't thinking about embarrassment. She was thinking about patterns, about how history repeats in ballrooms and lobbies and airports, about how she'd promised herself years ago that the next time someone tried to erase her dignity, they wouldn't just bruise her, they'd pay for it. The waiter still hovered, conflicted. Guests were whispering now, not all amused anymore. A few saw the humiliation for what it was. One older woman near the champagne fountain muttered, "That was unnecessary." But the heiress only laughed louder, leaning on her friends like cruelty was champagne too. Jordan pressed her phone tighter to her ear. On the other end, a voice answered instantly, her chief of staff. "Ma'am?" "Stand by," Jordan said. Her voice was calm, but the words carried steel. "If this is how they host partners, then the deal is dead." She didn't shout. She didn't wipe her face. She stood in the center of the ballroom like a verdict waiting to be read. The irony was sharp. The family thought tonight was their celebration, a victory lap before the ink dried. But the ink was still hers to spill or to erase, and they had just handed her the reason. The icing hadn't even dried when the commands began. "Security!" The heiress snapped her fingers like she was summoning a servant. Her satin sleeve glimmered as she pointed toward Jordan. "Get her out. She's not on the list. She doesn't belong." Two men in dark suits by the double doors shifted. They weren't sure if it was a joke or an order. But the tone, the entitled bite of someone used to instant obedience, made their shoes scrape against the marble as they started forward. The crowd parted, murmuring. Some leaned in closer, hungry for the drama. Wine glasses raised like theatergoers watching a play. Others looked away, uncomfortable, but none yet brave enough to speak. Jordan didn't move. She didn't flinch. Frosting still dripped from her chin, but her posture carried more weight than the entire chandelier above her. She held the phone at her side now, no longer at her ear, as if daring them to notice the calm before the storm. The heiress smirked wider. "Don't just stand there, escort her out." A murmur rippled through the room. A young man in a catering vest froze, phone hovering at chest level, half raised to record. His eyes flicked to Jordan, then back to the advancing guards. He didn't press the button, not yet, but his hesitation was loud enough for the people closest to him. One woman in emerald silk whispered sharply to her companion, "This isn't right." Her words slipped into the space between laughter and unease. Still, the heiress doubled down. She came in here dressed like she snuck past the valet, and now she thinks she has a seat at the table? Not tonight. The guards were almost upon her now. Jordan's silence filled the air like static before lightning. Her eyes swept the room not in panic, but in recognition. She had seen this before, in different uniforms, in different cities, the same script, with new actors. She exhaled slowly. Patterns, she thought. Always patterns. Then she spoke, quiet but sharp enough to cut through the chatter. "You're making a mistake." The guards hesitated, glancing at each other. The heiress barked again. "Do your job." One of them reached a hand forward, and that's when the first fracture appeared. From the far corner, a voice rose, not Jordan's, not the heiress's, but a witness. The older woman by the champagne fountain. Her tone carried the weight of someone who had seen too many of these nights before. "Leave her alone. She hasn't done anything." The room shifted. Dozens of eyes turned. The laughter faltered. The guard froze with his hand half extended. The heiress scoffed, but her smirk wavered. "Excuse me?" Another voice joined in this time, the young man in the catering vest, phone trembling in his grip. "I saw it. She didn't start this. You did." A ripple ran through the ballroom, tension breaking into murmurs. Some guests shook their heads. Others finally pulled out their phones, red recording lights blooming across the room like tiny rebellions. Jordan didn't need to raise her voice. She simply stood taller, frosting still, marking her skin like war paint, and let the silence collapse onto the heiress's shoulders. The guards lowered their hands, uncertain now not because they recognized Jordan, but because the crowd was no longer with them. The balance of the room had shifted, and for the first time that night, the heiress looked unsettled. The ballroom had turned uneasy. Laughter curdled into whispers. Security stalled halfway, their shoulders tight, eyes darting between the heiress's demand and the crowd's resistance. Jordan remained perfectly still. She dabbed a napkin across her cheek once, slow, deliberate, as if she were in her own office, not the center of a storm. No pleading, no anger, just silence, steady enough to make the chandeliers seem to hum. The heiress's composure cracked. She gestured sharply to the event manager, a man in a gray tuxedo with a clipboard tucked under his arm. His forehead gleamed with sweat, though his smile was thin and performative. "Handle this," she ordered. He cleared his throat and stepped forward, voice raised for the room to hear. "Ladies and gentlemen, apologies for the disruption. This guest appears to be uninvited. We ask for cooperation while we resolve this matter." Resolve. That word hung in the air, polite cover for removal. Jordan said nothing. She didn't need to. Her phone remained in her hand, screen dim but alive, a silent witness waiting for one word from her. The catering waiter, still clutching his phone, muttered just loud enough for those near him, "She's not uninvited." She was standing quiet until they threw cake. His voice wavered, but the truth in it landed like a stone in water, ripples spreading fast. The manager's jaw clenched. "Young man, keep out of this." But it was too late. More guests had their phones up now. The red dots of recording lights multiplied, catching every flicker of expression, every note of bias. The heiress rolled her eyes, her voice cutting sharper than glass. "She doesn't even belong in this room. Look at her. No badge, no escort, no invitation." She tilted her head toward Jordan like presenting evidence. "And now she's disrupting our evening." Gasps. A few voices whispered disagreement. One man in a navy suit near the bar muttered, "That's not how you treat people." Still, Jordan stood, silent, composed. The frosting streaks remained across her dress like scars, and yet she did not cover them. She let them show. The guards edged forward again, uneasy. One reached for her wrist. Jordan's eyes lifted, calm but cutting. "Touch me," she said, her tone low, "and you'll regret it." The guard froze, not because of volume she hadn't raised her voice, but because of certainty. It wasn't a warning, it was a prophecy. The heiress laughed, brittle now. "Empty threats. Do your job." The clipboard manager raised his hand as if to signal the guards forward. He wanted the cameras to see control, not chaos. But chaos was already in the air. Phones hovered high, whispers turned to open protests. Someone near the back shouted, "Let her speak!" Jordan finally exhaled. Still steady, still quiet. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't cornered. She was letting them write their own indictment, one arrogant command at a time. The ballroom was no longer a party, it was a trial, and the verdict was building with every second she stayed silent. The music had died. The string quartet in the corner sat frozen, bows suspended above silent instruments. The ballroom no longer felt like a party, it felt like a standoff. Jordan remained at the center, still marked by frosting, still unshaken. The heiress fumed, her smile stretched too tight, her voice louder than necessary. "Are you all blind? She's not supposed to be here. She's nothing. Throw her out." The words ricocheted across marble and mirrors, and this time, they didn't just vanish into laughter, they sparked reaction. From the bar, the man in the navy suit set down his glass. "I watched the whole thing. She didn't start it. You did." His voice was steady. Not loud, but loud enough. Heads turned. The heiress's cheeks flushed crimson. "Excuse me?" Before she could continue, a voice rose from the back. A young woman in a red gown lifted her phone high, recording openly. "It's on camera. Every word, every move. You shoved cake in her face, then called her uninvited. That's not policy, that's cruelty." The ripple turned into a wave. More phones went up, screens glowing in every direction. Some guests leaned into the spectacle, narrating in hushed tone. Others muttered disapproval, shaking their heads at the heiress. The event manager tried to wrestle back control, clipboard trembling in his grip. "Ladies and gentlemen, please, let's not escalate." "Escalate?" Someone snapped from the champagne fountain. The older woman who had spoken earlier stepped forward now, her pearl earrings catching the light. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the room. "You escalated the moment you humiliated her in front of us all." A hush followed, the weight of her words pressed down heavier than the chandeliers. The heiress turned frantic, her tone brittle. "You don't understand, people like her try to sneak into events all the time. We're protecting the integrity of this evening." That sentence, "people like her," hung in the air like smoke. Guests shifted, uncomfortable. A murmur swept the crowd. "Did she really just say that?" Someone whispered. Jordan didn't react. She stood anchored, letting the words do the damage themselves. The young waiter finally lifted his phone high, red light blinking. "I'm recording now," he said, voice trembling but firm. "And I'll post it if they try to touch her." The guards hesitated, caught between the manager's raised hand and the crowd's defiance. They weren't hired for this kind of stage. Their posture faltered. In the corner, A man in a white dinner jacket muttered to his partner, "She hasn't raised her voice once. That's real control." Oh. The heiress's smirk fractured, her confidence bleeding out. She turned to the event manager, voice cracking, "Do something!" But it was too late. The ballroom had chosen its spectacle. Not the music, not the wine, not the heiress. It was Jordan, silent, steady, waiting, and every phone in the room was watching. The air in the ballroom was no longer heavy with music or perfume. It was heavy with judgment. Dozens of phones floated like fireflies, catching every flicker of expression. The heiress's confidence thinned to panic, but she wasn't ready to surrender. She waved frantically to the event manager. "Say it," she hissed. "Tell them she doesn't belong." The manager hesitated, sweat streaking down his temple, but pressure is contagious. He straightened, forcing his voice into authority, and spoke loud enough to echo off crystal and marble. "She's not a guest. She's a fraud." Gasps cracked through the room. It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was an accusation, sharp and deliberate. The waiter filming whispered under his breath, "He just said it," and his phone captured every syllable. The heiress folded her arms, emboldened again. "You heard him. Fraud, con artist. Probably crashed the party just to pull a stunt." She smirked, eyes sweeping across the crowd. "Look at her dress. You think someone worth 4 billion shows up looking like that?" The insult spread like poison. A few guests chuckled nervously, aligning themselves with power. But others shook their heads, their voices breaking the illusion. "This isn't right." She gave her name. "Why won't you check the list?" "Because they don't want to." The older woman snapped back. Jordan finally moved, not her lips, but her gaze. She lifted her eyes to the manager, locking him in silence long enough that his clipboard trembled. She didn't need to answer his lie. The crowd was already dismantling it. The man in the navy suit at the bar spoke louder this time. "Fraud? She hasn't even spoken. You're branding her a criminal for standing still? That's not policy, that's profiling." The manager flushed, but doubled down. "We have procedures. High-profile events attract pretenders. It's my responsibility to protect our hosts." Jordan's voice sliced through at last, calm but resonant. "Protecting them from what? Cake on my face? Or the fact that I don't fit your picture of who belongs here?" The ballroom hushed again. No raised tone, no shouting, just steel in her words. The heiress broke the silence with a laugh too shrill. "Listen to her, acting righteous. Next she'll claim she runs the place." Phones caught everything. Every insult, every smirk, every second of arrogance. Jordan inhaled once. Steady. She could feel the tide turning not because she fought for it, but because truth has weight. And in this room, the weight was shifting. Still, she didn't rush. She let the heiress and the manager stack the charges against themselves, word by word, lie by lie. The crowd was no longer neutral. It was dividing. One half clinging to the heiress's arrogance, the other standing taller, angrier, voices louder than before. And in the middle of it all, Jordan stood with frosting like war paint and silence like a blade. The word fraud still echoed when the manager snapped his fingers at security. His clipboard shook, but his voice was sharp. "Remove her. Now." The guards stiffened, caught between fear of losing their jobs and the hundreds of eyes now recording. One of them finally stepped forward. His hand hovered above Jordan's arm like a brand waiting to burn. The heiress smirked, her voice dripping with triumph. "Go on, show her where she really belongs." Jordan didn't move. She stood rooted in the marble, frosting streaks glistening under chandelier light. Her silence only magnified the insult, the idea that touching her was necessary, that her presence itself was a crime. The guard's fingers brushed the fabric of her sleeve. Gasps shot through the crowd like sparks on dry wood. Someone shouted from the back, "Don't touch her!" Phones tilted higher. The red glow of recording lights swarmed in closer. The older woman by the champagne fountain stepped forward, her voice ringing clear. "She hasn't raised a hand. She hasn't raised her voice. And you lay a hand on her? That's assault." The guard froze. The manager barked again, louder this time, trying to drown out the dissent. "She's trespassing. She's disrupting the event. Call the police." Those two words, "call the police," slammed into the room heavier than the music ever had. The crowd shifted uneasily. Whispers turned urgent. A man in the corner muttered, "Over cake? Are you serious?" Another guest shook her head, whispering, "This is going to ruin them." The heiress, flushed but relentless, clutched a napkin like a victory flag. Yes, call them. Let them drag her out. She'll learn what happens when you pretend to be us. The line landed like poison. Pretend to be us. Guests gasped audibly now. The waiter holding his phone stepped forward, trembling but defiant. I'm streaming this live, he said. His voice cracked, but it carried. Everyone will see. The guards faltered again, but the manager pressed on, desperate. He pulled out a radio from his pocket, thumb hovering. Dispatch, we have a situation. Jordan finally moved. She lifted her phone back to her ear, calm as ever. Activate the protocol, she said softly. Her words weren't for the room, but the room felt them all the same. The manager blinked, confused. The heiress laughed harshly. Protocol? What protocol? You don't have anything. But for the first time, her laughter sounded afraid. The ballroom was no longer a celebration. It was a courtroom, and the verdict was coming, fast. Jordan's voice was calm, but it carried more weight than the chandelier above her. Activate the protocol. On the other end of the line, her chief of staff didn't ask questions. Understood. Logging everything. Video, audio, timestamp. Do you want me to escalate? Jordan's eyes never left the manager, his thumb still trembling over the radio. Yes, escalate. Freeze all pending contracts with the Harrington family effective immediately. The words slipped into the air like a blade. Most of the crowd didn't understand them, but the heiress did. Her smirk faltered. What did you just say? She demanded, her voice louder than she intended. Jordan didn't answer. She didn't need to. The phone in her hand was already moving mountains beyond that ballroom. The manager laughed nervously, trying to cover the crack in the room's tension. She's bluffing. Just a stunt for attention. He turned toward the crowd, waving dismissively. She doesn't have that kind of power. But the people watching weren't convinced. Not anymore. The waiter's live stream chat was exploding. Phones everywhere were capturing every breath, and the murmurs were turning against the hosts. A man in a silver tie whispered, "Did she just kill their deal?" His companion nodded slowly, eyes wide. Sounds like it. The heiress's composure cracked further. She stepped closer, her voice shrill. You don't get to say that. You're nobody. You don't even have a seat at this table. Jordan finally looked directly at her, gaze steady, voice sharp enough to slice the room. I don't need a seat at your table. I own the building it sits in. Gasps tore through the crowd. A few claps even broke out before nervous silence swallowed them again. The heiress flushed crimson. She's lying. She has to be lying. But the room was no longer hers. The manager lowered his radio, uncertainty etched across his face. The guard stepped back a pace, unwilling to be part of a story spiraling out of control. Jordan spoke once more into her phone. Confirm the cancellation of the Harrington deal. $4 billion. Effective now. On the line, her chief of staff's voice was crisp, undeniable. Confirmed. Deal terminated. Notification sent to all partners. The heiress's knees wavered. Her friends muttered in disbelief, and the crowd, now fully awake, buzzed like a storm breaking. Jordan didn't shout. She didn't raise her hand. She simply stood there, frosting still streaked across her skin, while her words dismantled an empire in real time. The balance of the ballroom had shifted entirely, and the fear was no longer hers to carry. The ballroom buzzed with disbelief. Glasses clinked against tables, whispers swelled into waves, and every phone lens strained toward the woman standing calm in the storm. The heiress, pale beneath her makeup, forced a brittle laugh. Cancel a $4 billion deal? Do you have any idea what you're saying? You're no one. Jordan lifted her chin, the frosting on her cheek gleaming under chandelier light like battle paint. Her voice carried, low but unmistakable. My name is Jordan Ellis. I am the founder and CEO of Ellis Global Industries. And yes, she let her eyes sweep the room, catching the camera lights, the gasps, the silence. I had the authority to kill that deal, which I just did. The room fractured. Some guests gasped aloud. A woman in emerald silk clapped a hand over her mouth. The waiter's live stream exploded, comments flooding faster than he could read. The manager's clipboard slipped from his grasp, pages scattering across marble like fallen confetti. The guards stepped back further, their posture collapsing under the weight of what they now understood. The heiress shook her head violently, denial dripping from every syllable. No, that's impossible. If you were who you say you are, you wouldn't be standing here like this. She gestured at the frosting, the simple dress, the absence of diamonds. You'd look the part. Jordan's gaze was steady, unwavering. Power doesn't need sequins. It doesn't need chandeliers or champagne. Real power stands exactly where it chooses and doesn't ask permission. Phones caught the line instantly, a drop-the-mic moment etched into digital memory. The older woman by the champagne fountain nodded, eyes fierce. "I knew it," she murmured, her voice just loud enough to carry. The heiress stumbled a step backward, clutching her napkin as if it could shield her. Her voice cracked. "You can't just walk in and humiliate me like this." Jordan took one calm step forward. "Humiliation?" Her tone was sharper than steel. "You humiliated yourself the moment you mistook silence for weakness." The crowd erupted, some with applause, some with stunned gasps, others whispering furiously into their phones. The tide had fully turned. The manager stammered, "Miss Ellis, I didn't realize." Jordan cut him off with a look so cold it froze the words in his throat. The truth was undeniable now. The woman they tried to erase was the very architect of their fortune. The guest they mocked was the host of the future. And every second of it was being recorded, streamed, immortalized. The reveal was complete. And in the ballroom's charged silence, one reality rang louder than crystal. Jordan Ellis didn't just belong here. She owned the room. The ballroom no longer belonged to chandeliers or champagne. It belonged to silence, raw, suffocating, undeniable. The heiress staggered backward, her heels skidding against marble. The napkin in her fist was shredded, frosting smeared across her manicured nails. No, this isn't real." Her voice cracked into a whimper, stripped of its earlier venom. Around her, the circle of friends who once laughed the loudest shrank away, eyes wide, whispers sharp. One man in a tuxedo hissed, "She just killed the deal," before slipping toward the exit, unwilling to be caught in the fallout. The manager bent down to gather his scattered clipboard pages, but his hands shook so badly that paper slipped from his fingers again and again. His practiced smile was gone, replaced by sweat and the hollow stare of a man watching his career disintegrate in front of hundreds of witnesses. The guards, once looming, now stood off to the side, their shoulders slumped. They avoided Jordan's gaze, avoided the cameras, avoided the truth. And the guests were no longer passive. Applause broke out in pockets, hesitant at first, then stronger, building momentum. Phones tilted higher, capturing not just Jordan's composure but the unraveling of those who had mocked her. The older woman near the fountain clapped once, firm and deliberate. "About time," she said, her words ringing like a gavel. The waiter who had streamed everything lowered his phone for a moment, his eyes wide with awe. "She's the CEO," he whispered, as if the truth itself was too heavy for air. The heiress spun, desperate, her voice shrill. "Stop filming, all of you! Do you know who I am?" A man in the crowd replied flatly, "Yes, and after tonight, everyone else will too." His phone didn't waver. The heiress's face drained of color. She turned to the manager, clawing at his sleeve. "Fix this! Fix it now!" But the manager only stammered, "Miss Ellis, we didn't know." His words collapsed into silence under Jordan's steady gaze. Jordan didn't shout. She didn't move. She simply stood, the frosting on her skin catching the chandelier's light like armor, her phone still in hand like a scepter. She had said enough. The rest of the room was speaking for her. Every smirk had melted. Every jeer had turned into whispers of regret. The power had inverted, flipped cleanly, leaving those who once mocked exposed in their smallness. And in that moment, it became clear. Humiliation had changed hands. The heiress was no longer the hostess of the night. She was the spectacle. The collapse was complete. Jordan lifted the phone back to her ear. Her voice was low, but it cut through the ballroom louder than any violin or toast ever had. "Terminate every agreement tied to the Harrington family, effective immediately." On the other end, her chief of staff responded without hesitation. "Confirmed. $4 billion deal canceled. Notices sent to legal, finance, and press." The heiress's knees buckled. She gripped the edge of a table, sending crystal glasses toppling, champagne spilling across white linen like blood on snow. "No, you can't do that. You can't." Jordan's gaze never softened. "I just did." The manager tried one last desperate plea. "Miss Ellis, please, it was a misunderstanding." She silenced him with a single look. Then, calmly, into the phone. "Add one more note. Blacklist the event management firm. Effective immediately. No contracts, no renewals, ever again." Ah! Gasps rippled through the room. The manager dropped his clipboard entirely this time, the pages scattering like ashes at his feet. His mouth opened, then closed, words dissolving before they left his tongue. The guards stepped back farther, practically melting into the walls. They were no longer enforcers, they were witnesses. The heiress's face contorted, pride shattered. She tried to summon her old arrogance, but it cracked in her throat. You think this makes you powerful? You embarrassed yourself. Everyone's laughing at you. Jordan took one slow step closer, her heels echoing on marble, frosting still staining her dress. They're not laughing at me, she said, voice steady. They're watching you lose everything in real time. Phones rose higher, recording every word, every tremor in the heiress's hands, every drop of fear in the manager's eyes. Jordan turned her gaze back to the crowd, not for applause, not for validation, but for finality. Tonight wasn't about cake. It wasn't about a party. It was about respect. And when respect is denied, consequences follow. The ballroom vibrated with the weight of her words. Some guests clapped. Some simply stood in stunned silence. But no one doubted what they had just witnessed. The punishment was swift, public, irreversible. And the humiliation no longer belonged to Jordan Ellis. It belonged to those who tried to erase her. The ballroom stood frozen, the echo of Jordan's verdict still trembling through crystal and marble. The heiress sagged against the table, mascara streaking, her napkin a useless shield in her hand. The manager stared at the floor, clipboard abandoned, career evaporating in plain view. Jordan didn't linger on their collapse. She didn't need to. Their downfall was self-inflicted. All she had done was shine a light. She lifted her phone one final time. That will be all, she said to her chief of staff. Calm, certain, absolute. The line clicked silent, but the weight of her command still filled the air. A hush stretched across the room. Every eye followed her as she set the napkin gently on the table, frosting stains visible like scars on white cloth. She smoothed the front of her dress not to hide the damage, but to wear it openly, proof of what had been done and what she had survived. Then she spoke. Her voice was quiet, but every syllable carried across the room. You thought cake could humiliate me, but humiliation doesn't stick to people like me. It sticks to those who throw it. Phones caught it instantly. A ripple of gasps and murmurs surged through the crowd. The line wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. It was final. The older woman by the champagne fountain began to clap, slow and deliberate. Others joined hesitant at first, then stronger, until the ballroom echoed with applause. Not polite applause, not for spectacle, but for truth revealed in real time. The heiress covered her face with trembling hands. The manager slumped into a chair, clipboard forgotten. The guards kept their distance, eyes down. And the guests, they knew they would never forget what they had witnessed. Jordan turned toward the double doors, her heels steady on marble, her stride unhurried. Each step felt like a gavel strike. Each step reminded the room that power doesn't scream, it moves. At the threshold, she paused. The crowd held its breath. She glanced back once, eyes sweeping over the chandelier-lit room, the phones, the silence, the shame clinging to those who had mocked her. Her final words were simple, but they carved deeper than any insult that had been thrown. I don't need to record this moment. I am the result of it. With that, Jordan Ellis pushed open the doors and walked out into the night, frosting still on her skin, dignity intact, empire unshaken. Behind her, the applause swelled again, this time not for her alone, but for the justice they had just seen unfold. And in that ballroom, history tilted, if only by a few degrees, enough to remind them all. Respect is not a favor, it is a boundary. Cross it, and the consequences are written in silence and steel.